up, everybody? This is Steve Breach coming to you here today. We are driving home on St. Patrick's Day. It's going to be one heck of a day from here on out. Throwing those corned beefs in and getting them all fired up for dinner tonight. It's pretty much WrestleMania season right now. A lot of the matches are already being announced, and one of the things I kind of like to do on the road to WrestleMania here is kind of like do like some throwback episodes of some things that I've always loved thinking about, that rattle around in my brain, and love cranking those out for like old school WrestleMania guys like myself. And the one thing that I was kind of thinking about more than anything else is the Hulk Hogan versus The Rock match from WrestleMania in Toronto, WrestleMania 18. That was such a big, monumental match for the WWF at the time. I thought that honestly that was, one of the biggest matches in WrestleMania history at the time. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that I thought that it was one of the best matches of all time, but the star caliber of The Rock, the man of the people, the people's champ at that time. Of course, we really didn't know that time with The Rock was pretty much on the back end. You thought that he was going to be the superstar of tomorrow. It's funny, you go next year, WrestleMania 19 in Seattle, and that's pretty much one of his last WrestleManias as a full-time worker. He started doing movies. He got a taste of like Saturday Night Live, and just the power of his celebrity was too big to keep in WWE. WrestleMania 20 was like that last real big moment for him, even though the match wasn't great with the Rock and Sock connection going up against Evolution. To me, honestly, he would have big matches, he would have championship matches, but the Rock versus Hulk Hogan is quite possibly, behind Stone Cold Steve Austin, one of the biggest matches the Rock ever had in his career. If you go back in history at that time, we are 1 year removed from the closure of WCW, WWE buying pretty much the pieces of WCW out of the hands of Ted Turner. They didn't really go into bankruptcy like ECW did, but because of the contracts that were ironclad at the time, we didn't get Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Goldberg, sitting up in the press box of WrestleMania 17, cheering on Shane McMahon at the time. Of course, it's hard to believe that a go-home Raw is where they announced the sale of WCW, and the name on the contracts reads McMahon, but not Vince McMahon. It's Shane McMahon. I can remember, kind of just, being one of those guys that used the internet at the time. I don't really even remember what I did. I guess I looked up, baseball cards and stuff like that, wrestling memorabilia at the time on eBay. I know at the time I used Wrestling Headlines, was the site that I went to to follow wrestling news. I don't really remember what else I was doing on the internet at the time, but I remember one day just punching up WWE.com, and I'll never forget that feeling. Right there on the main screen was the NWO. Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Hulk Hogan, and they announced that they had signed contracts to come back to WWE. There was no major surprise of them showing up on a Raw or a pay-per-view. This was, of course, before the online promo from Vince McMahon, where he said that he was going to poison his own company so Ric Flair couldn't control what he created, and then turned around in the chair, and then with a deodorant stick they spelled out NWO on the back of it, meaning that Vince was bringing those guys in. So this was even before then. So, to give away that kind of a surprise, and for those guys to come in, was huge. I didn't listen or read Dave Meltzer at the time. I honestly really didn't even know who he was. When I read wrestling headlines, if his name was in there, I know that I heard some people talk about him on shoot interviews through RF Video at the time, but I didn't know who he was or how to read him. I honestly thought that he probably was like a reporter that, you know, wrote stories in the actual newspaper or something like that. I really don't know. So I don't know why I was watching WWE at the time and the Invasion came up, and I've always been a supporter of the Invasion, saying that the Invasion storyline really wasn't as bad as a lot of people say or remember. But, you know, there was no Goldberg, there was no NWO, no Macho Man. You know, it was really just Booker T, DDP. Who else was out there? I mean, they had the ECW guys come in who kind of got the rub, you know, to be in that big Survivor Series main event for the control of WWF, and, you know, if they were going to kill ECW and WCW, and of course then they would bring back King, and Paul Heyman would disappear and things like that. But you know, I thought that it was fun to kind of watch the storylines at the time and see what was progressing at the time. I didn't really have memories of, man, it would be so much better. I just kind of took it as like, this is what we got and it's gonna be good. And I believed that these guys were on the same star power as the WWF guys. Looking back, and you look at that team of freaking The Rock, you know, and you see Undertaker, Kane, Chris Jericho, you're kind of like scratching your head like, man, this looks like, you know, the War Games when freaking the Dungeon of Doom took on like Team Hulkamania. And it was like, wow, how did anybody even buy this? But then again, if I was really watching WCW in 1995, I probably wanted to buy it just to see how that team of, you know, Sting, the Macho Man, Lex Luger, Hulk Hogan worked together at the time, or if they were going to have some sort of a turn, because it just doesn't make sense that you got Earthquake, Kamala, Kevin Sullivan, and the Boogeyman out there, and thinking that the heels even thought they had a chance to win that match. But we get down to business. I mean, you got to have some sort of a story to get you there, but really it was just Hulk Hogan coming out, confronting The Rock, issuing a challenge, and that was kind of all we needed. But we would sort of see things progress because the NWO have to be the NWO. They end up, you know, beating up The Rock. They end up throwing him in an ambulance, and then they run the ambulance over with a semi-truck. I get it. I mean, it kind of goes along with the NWO storylines of back in the day of just, you think you're on the same page as me, you want to have a match, we'll have a match, but then, like, you know, beating the guy into the senses of like, you're not going into this 100%. It's the same storyline that, you know, basically every Four Horsemen match went to. You know, you might be going to the pay-per-view to fight Flair, but you're gonna fight Anderson the week before, and Arn's gonna put a hurting on you. He don't even care about winning that match. He just wants to hurt you, because he knows that having the title on Flair is best for him, it's best for the group, and it's best for what we get from there. So that kind of like puts them on an even playing ground. But I'll tell you the truth, you know, Hulk Hogan was such a big star. He came out as Hollywood. If I remember right, he came out to the Jimi Hendrix theme. I think it's been replaced with the New Age NWO theme that they use for the WWE Network on Peacock and things like that, because we can't have good things because it costs money, and WWE doesn't have enough of it, I guess you can say, to keep things the way they are. That's why you buy DVDs and physical media, and you keep them so that way you have them in case anything gets erased, deleted, or anything like that. But you know, seeing him out there was just monumental. There was, you know, a few things popped up on the radar that, you know, maybe Hulk was trying to come back. And if you read his book or you've listened to interviews, it's understandable that, you know, people were thinking that Hulk was actually going to come back and be a part of WWF. It never ended up happening. The heavy pockets of Ted Turner and Eric Bischoff knowing that he had to have Hulk Hogan to keep that thing going. I don't know. Hulk Hogan costed a lot of money on paper for that guaranteed contract, and then also you go through that contract, the money that they were paying him for pay-per-views that he was on. He was getting a big chunk of those. He was getting, you know, merchandise deals to wear NWO shirts and things like that. Maybe if they just were to let Hulk go back, I mean, they had Nash, they had Hall, they could have kept the NWO together besides for Hogan. And what was Vince in the Attitude Era really got to do with Hulk? You know, Hulk came back. He, you know, he did this WrestleMania, and I'll tell you the truth, he went on the Hulkamania tour, which made sense. Did not make any sense that he wins the championship in a month, and I hope I can get to that later, because that was a horrible idea. No matter who Hulk Hogan is or who Hulk Hogan was, it didn't make any sense then. It doesn't make any sense now. But shoot, where was I going? You know, I don't really know that Vince would have known what to do or how to use him, and it would have cost a lot of money that he probably would have had to cut some lesser talent that you would have brought over to WCW. They had so much talent as it is, maybe they didn't need any more. Maybe a guy slips through the crack and you get a star, much like when, you know, Jericho left and went to go over there, or Eddie Guerrero left and went over there. You know, you got somebody back as a replacement instead of just the roster just constantly losing and losing and losing. But when those guys got in there in Toronto, and they stood there much like when, you know, Hogan fought Ultimate Warrior, and they stared into each other's eyes and they milked that audience for all that they had. They really didn't need to do much in that match, but it's really, really good. The crowd gave us everything they had. Honestly, you take that match, you press the mute button for longer than 2 minutes, you're gonna be watching it, and it's not what you think it is. It's the crowd that is the MVP of that match 100%. Whether if it was Rock, whether if it was Hogan, whether if it was Vince watching in the back and talk to the ref to pull this off, the fact that they pull off a double turn in that match, Rock ends up, you know, going heel. Hulk Hogan ends up soaking it up to be a babyface. They put it all back together. To me, the only part that doesn't really make sense is when the NWO comes out after Hogan loses the match and, you know, shows appreciation to The Rock for having a good match with them, where they shake hands. That Hall and Nash, you know, they try to put a beat down on Hulk. Hall lost a match that night, and Nash didn't even have one. So what are those guys mad about? NWO lost matches in WCW all the time. I'm sure Hulk won more than he lost, but he had a match to lose, and they could have gone on strong from there. The best thing about the NWO and WCW was the fact that, like, even after Starrcade, when they lost to Piper, they just walked out the next night on Nitro and acted like it never happened. They didn't even talk about the loss. They talked about it as if they beat Piper. Just, it is what it is. I mean, they could have kept on rolling, but I think that Vince saw that the fans loved Hulk. They wanted to do the Hulk Still Rules tour for, I think at that time, it was probably like the 20th anniversary of Hulk Hogan or something like that. It had to be somewhere close to there. But there's people out there that I know loved Hulk, and they were glad to see him come back. I'm sure there was people out there that The Rock was their favorite guy at the time, and they got to see the matchup. At that point in my fandom. I loved Triple H. I think I loved him even more that he was a heel. But, you know, the next month after the match, I get to see my two favorite guys, Hulk Hogan and Triple H, have a match. Didn't make any sense to me how Hulk became the number one contender. I think he won some sort of a match on SmackDown. I don't really remember it, so it kind of adds to the whole thing of I don't really understand how he became a number one contender. But he goes in and he wins the match. Triple H comes back from a huge injury, wins the Royal Rumble, goes on to WrestleMania. I guess you can say he main evented it. It's kind of forgettable because of how big this Rock versus Hogan match was. But he wins the main event, and a month later drops the championship to Hulk. Hulk